start the recording and repeat just briefly the kinds of things that I've been talking about for the assignment this week, which was to submit a topic the past week, to submit a topic for your final term paper, which is not due until the end of the semester. But the topic we asked you to submit now, so I could give you feedback on whether it was a good topic. I did get a couple emails from individuals that didn't completely get the concept of what a new venture was for this paper. It really refers to, some kind of an entrepreneurial and innovative enterprise. It could be one that you're doing. It could be one that you'd like to do. But it's not an analysis of somebody else's venture, although it could be, in fact, a business plan for somebody else's venture. Maybe you have a friend that wants to start a restaurant. You could, in fact, help that friend develop the business plan for the restaurant. But it can't be a history of how your friend developed the restaurant. And I hope you see the difference between that. One is retrospective, the other is prospective. A new venture could be a entrepreneurial firm, like the next Facebook, the next Microsoft. It could be a charitable venture, a food truck venture, a charitable venture in some other part of the world, a medical charity. It could be a lifestyle firm, a sailing venture in the Caribbean, or a fitness program for future America's ninjas. It could be a variety of things, and we talked about those in the first few chapters. So that's what this was all about. Now, some of you have also, very few fortunately, but still, it's when we have 60 students in the class, if a couple or three of you are having difficulties, it's still unfortunate, understanding that each week you're asked to take a quiz in which I ask a few questions. And the concept is that you have to get all the questions correct before moving on. So you can take the quiz as often as you wish. You can go in there, take the quiz, go back and look, find out what you got wrong, go back and look at the material, say, okay, now I see the answer to that, fix it, and take the quiz again. When you get 100%, the next week opens. But I have had about 2, maybe 3 out of the 60 who haven't kind of caught on to that and just do not understand why you can't see the instructions for week 2, why you've missed these assignments, and so on. So that's the reason. The reason is that you have a mastery test each week. You read the materials, you take the mastery test. Once you've gotten 100%, then the next week's material will open. If you haven't gotten 100%, the next week's materials will not open. This is a standard technique that the continuing education at Lowell uses in a number of its courses. And I think it works pretty well, because if you are having some kind of a problem with a concept, then you're going to find that out right away, not have to wait till the final exam to find it out, and be able to correct it at the time. So that's why we do that. Tonight, we're going to focus on business models. As I often say every week, I'm wide open to questions. There are several of you that are on already, which is a terrific thing. And if you have a question, feel free to launch that question through the chat bar, or if you have audio on your computer, feel free to just speak up, and that will work just fine as well. And I'm just coming back here to fix something I did. Okay, and so there we go. Okay, I was resharing that, so feel free to ask questions and as we go along. Okay, let's talk about business models. I said a little earlier that this is a very core, important part of the course. It will help you a lot with your papers, and in the end, that paper is the culmination, the capstone of this course, because you're going to fill out a business model for some kind of a venture, and you're going to be able to describe that business model and tell a little bit about how you would, whether it is something you've made up in your head, or whether it's a company you actually want to start, or a company that you're working with somebody else that wants to start. You're going to tell how you would do this. By the way, it could also be corporate entrepreneurship, but it can't be just a change within the corporation. I had one individual that suggested that they just wanted to make better quality in a big company that they were at. Well, no, that's too nebulous. That sounds like Six Sigma to me. You know, General Electric's famous approach used in many places for improving quality. That's great stuff. That's great stuff. It's just not part of this course. This course is about new ventures. It could be charitable ventures. It could be entrepreneurial, software companies. It could be a variety of things. I gave a number of references that I tried to draw from. I'm not going to go over those now. That's for your reading, because I want to begin with what is many people think is a terrific example of how you can change a business model and therefore create an entirely new venture. So the venture that we're going to look at, the new venture, and we're looking back, okay? We're not creating a business plan for this. We're going to figure out how they created their business plan. And the venture we're looking at is Uber. I selected that because it's fairly new, because it has many of the characteristics of business model innovation, and because probably most of you use Uber at one time or another and have some kind of familiarity with it. It's pretty new in the sense that it's less than 10 years old, founded in 2009 by Garrett Camp and Travis Kalanick. I'll show some pictures of them. They met in Paris. Garrett Camp was very frustrated with the inability to get taxis. I used to serve on a lot of boards of companies where I had to have meetings in New York City. Believe me, there is no more frustrating place than New York City, and trying to get a taxi, especially if it was during rush hour and you wanted to go to the airport. And if they saw you carrying a bag, they simply wouldn't pick you up. Sometimes I would hide my bag, hail the cab, and then open the door and grab the bag and jump in before they realized I was going to the airport. So there was clearly a pain that they were feeling, that lots of people were feeling, and not liking taxis. There were problems with it. But it's not so easy to compete with such an established organization unless you have a better business model. And that's what they were after, the better business model. And so the original pitch was, hey, there's all these folks who are always looking for a driver. We could split the cost of a driver and a parking phone. We'll create an iPhone app to do this, and we're all set. They launched it in January of 2010 in New York, launched it later in San Francisco, expanded into other cities, expanded internationally, and of course, you're all well aware of how far it's gone. The two entrepreneurs were kind of classic entrepreneurs in a sense. Those that know the story might say, well, wait a minute, Professor Wilson, this Travis Kalanick was a little bit, yes, I agree. I'm saying they're classic entrepreneurs in terms of their histories. We're going to come to some of the shortcomings that Travis demonstrated over time. But here are these two individuals. They were both serial entrepreneurs. They have founded a number of companies. Travis Kalanick was a dropout, but Garrett Camp was a graduate with a bachelor's and master's degree in electrical engineering and software engineering. He was really the technical brains in the operation, and Travis was the business front end of the operation. Now, they must have had an incredible pitch, that's part of the final paper that you're going to have to do. You're going to have a pitch for your venture. You're going to have to come and be able to tell why people should get involved in your venture, maybe invest in your venture. He got some of the very best investors to invest in Uber. So he had a good financial start. Okay. Now let's try to figure out the business model. How would you do this? There are taxis all over the place. How do you compete with taxis? In fact, you got a real problem there because taxis are highly regulated and you're not even allowed to compete with taxis. So the first thing you're going to have to do is make sure that nobody can call you a taxi, that nobody can say you're a taxi driver, because the minute you say you're a taxi driver, you're going to have to go through all the licensing of all the cities and so on. So what did they do? They said they were ride sharing. They would act as a middleman between drivers who didn't even work for them and clients who were looking for a ride. And Uber would just match them up, and they would take 20% of the driver's earnings, but they would match the drivers and the clients. The things that I'm talking about today with Uber too, those that have been around for a while and using Uber know it changes over time. So I'm going to be talking about the business model in the early years. And from time to time, I'll kind of show how the business model has changed a little bit, because that's also important. But mostly I'm going to be talking about the business model as existed in the early years that allowed them to break into the market, an impossible market to break into, and they did it anyway. So Uber could control the rate, raise and lower it, since it was just a ride-sharing service, right? It wasn't a taxi, because if it was a taxi, then the cities control, or the states control, the governments control the rates. So it can't be a taxi service, they have to be ride-sharing. The drivers at that time were responsible for gas and repairs and for insurance. That has changed. That's one of those things that's changed. Clients rate the drivers, how they do, and encourages competition. Drivers rate the clients, which led to some problems, because that meant that low-rated clients might not actually get picked up. Drivers would try to avoid them, and then there were some issues around, well, on what basis? Is it gender? Is it race? Is it economics? So that has to be modified a little bit. Of course, Uber coming in and saying we're not a taxi, we're a ride-sharing service, I guarantee you the taxi drivers did not buy that at all, and it led to protests, unionization, legal issues, and so on. And Uber did not require drivers to have a commercial license, and didn't even go through any background checks. Those of you from around the Boston area, which I hope you're all warm and dry today. It's been one heck of a winter so far, and today was certainly a great example of that one heck of a day. But those that are from around Boston know that that Massachusetts has forced drivers to go through background checks because there were so many problems with that. But in the beginning, they didn't. They came up with an idea that is a little different. You don't hear about taxis having partnerships. They may have ads and things on them, but Uber went out and saw partnerships. They went to AT&T and said, would you build this into your new AT&T Android phones? It's a service for your users, and by the way, it'll be great for us too. They went to the NFL Players Association and gave players $200 worth of credits, and the NFL thought this was great because too many of their players were being arrested for DUI and getting in difficulties, and here was a way that you could go out, have a nice night at a club, call Uber, and they would take you home with $200 worth of credits. They partnered with GM and Toyota to get financing and leasing deals for Uber drivers who were not employees of Uber, which really helped their operating costs. And they also partnered with the American Red Cross to make themselves, frankly, look good that they were giving money out to the Red Cross Disaster Relief Fund. Well, that was their plan, and you have to say it's worked pretty well. But there's been a lot of pushback. And, clearly governments have just been all over it. Taxi commissions, drivers, owners have protested. I have a list of different places. They've had bad public relations. Drivers with criminal records were caught driving and committed crimes. Car accidents were involving pedestrians. Drivers denied service to the disabled, which is not legal. In spite of all that, they've expanded very rapidly, and they're a very solid, well-established brand. Even though there are competitors like Lyft and Sidecar and different competitors in different countries, they maintain a very, very strong market presence. And anybody that wants to chime in anytime, ask a question or anything. So now that we've kind of described it and we tried to focus in on pieces of the business model, and which will, by the end of this session tonight, we're going to take that business model, all these pieces we've talked about, one sheet of paper where you say, I plug this piece in here, this piece in here, this piece in here, this piece in here, so I can get it down on one piece of paper and describe the difference of Uber's business model from taxis, and that you will do the same with your new venture. Okay, let's take a comparison now to the business model. Uber, the company is not licensed as a taxi company, saves them a lot of money. Taxis, companies licensed by the government, costs a lot of money, a lot of regulatory hassle. Uber, drivers do not need commercial licenses. As I said, there's things always changing on this, but basically that was the beginning of the model. Taxis, drivers require to be specially licensed by the government. Uber, drivers own their own cars. What does that mean? Saves Uber a lot of money. Taxis, company owns the cabs. What does that mean? They have to spend a lot of money on cabs, maintenance, and so on. Drivers provide gas and maintenance in Uber, but the company provides gas and maintenance. More expense for the taxis, less for Uber. Cars are called with a mobile app. Taxis mostly changing all the time. Cars are called by phone. Uber, since 2014, the company provides insurance. Before that, they did not. Uber, rates are unregulated. If you ever pay the surge rates when you're having trouble getting a car, economists would tell you this is a great way to regulate the use of car sharing, but governments say rates should be regulated, and you shouldn't charge people usurious rates, just because things are very, very busy, or it's a Super Bowl, or something like that. Uber, drivers can refuse clients. Taxis, drivers cannot legally refuse clients. Uber, clients rate drivers, drivers rate clients. Taxis, nobody rates anybody. So when you put it down that way, immediately you see a huge advantage for Uber, a huge advantage compared to taxis, which is exactly why taxi companies and so on hate Uber. So the business model now we can define as a way the company uses its resources, structures its relationships, interfaces with its customers, creates value, and returns revenues and profits. We talked about each of those kinds of things. And if you look at an organization's business model, it can tell you how a company can become self-sustaining. That may not be obvious to you now, but we're going to look at a bunch of different business models. And I hope that you will begin over time as we look at these business models to see how that business model can make a huge difference in understanding whether the business makes sense. It starts with how does it make money and create value? It gives you an ongoing feasibility analysis. You can look at the business model, and the minute you see, we're in trouble, you have to figure out how to get out of it. The taxi drivers took a look at this business model comparisons. We looked at it and said, uh-oh, we're in trouble. How do we get out of it? We go to the government and we try to shut these guys down, which they have done in, say, the UK and some places. The business model, though, tells the company how all those pieces fit together, customers, suppliers, and so on. And it provides the rationale that tells why do they care? Why do they work together? Why do customers pay? Why do suppliers supply? Why do they want to or need to? We call that an articulation of core logic to the stakeholders. Why do you exist? Okay, the core logic of Uber is, fairly obvious. It's a ride-sharing core logic with rides being matched with riders and a company taking a rake off the top, Uber taking a rake off the top. It articulates their mission and it articulates their business model. So here are a few of the components that we're going to start with. We're going to, as I said, get this right into a list pretty soon. But, clearly we need to know, what is the value proposition? Why does anybody care? Well, the value proposition for Uber was easy, right? I can get a car when I need it. It's a nicer car. It will treat me better. It will take me where I want to go, and I will know the price, and I will know how long it is going to take before it gets there. The target market. Well, the target market is, pretty clear for those that need a ride, especially in cities. Who would be the suppliers? What activities would you engage in? Well, the activities for Uber was the matching process, right? And a little bit of the publicity and marketing and so on. But really, they didn't have to do much of that. It was mostly just putting together the matching, recruiting drivers, and then being able to match the drivers with the riders and price it properly. And figuring out the kind of value that might be created by this. Let me now take a second example. I hope the second example will, in fact, it's a little different, but once again, it'll show how a new company coming into the computer business, Dell, decided to organize themselves differently. And when you look at their business model, suddenly you say, aha, I understand why Dell was so successful. The traditional PC suppliers, if you look on the left, they began by forecasting demand, obtaining the subcomponent, once they forecast demand for their computers, they said, okay, we got to build these computers, we're going to need disk drives, we're going to need keyboards, blah, blah, blah. We're going to need this and that and wires. And so they put out orders to get those subcomponents from suppliers. They may make some of the components. They assemble the whole thing. Once it's assembled, they send it out to a wholesaler who ships it to a retailer. It's in retail inventory. It's set up on display in some store. The consumer comes in and says, oh, I see 5 computers here. Do I want any of those? Maybe, maybe not. Okay, that was the way most computer sales were done prior to Dell. Dell changed that. Dell said, why should we forecast demand? Why not just ask a customer what they want? And so the customer would call in and say, this is what I want. I want this computer with this hard drive, with this amount of memory, with this blah, 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 blah. And the order would be placed. The computer systems at Dell would take that order, and the suppliers would see, oh my goodness, they need, 500, 100 megabyte hard drives back in the day. And they would those right off to them, right? Dell did assemble the computer then as these things came in from the orders came in from the customers, the supplies came in from the suppliers, they put them together and they shipped them directly to the, to the customer. This is called, I've mentioned it before, disintermediation, right? They took out the wholesaler, they took out the retailer, And they took out inventory. They didn't inventory these computers, right? They built to order, kind of like you go into a restaurant, right? And they cook to order. And a big deal out of this was they had direct access to the customer relationship. Whereas in those days, in the old days, HP, IBM, so on, Lenovo it is now, did not have access to the customer, right? They shipped through a wholesaler who shipped through a retailer, and the retailer, which might have been Best Buy, Circuit City back in the day, again, right? Target, Walmart had the relationship with the customer. Wow, it's pretty clear why they won. I'm not going to go through those others. You've had a chance to read these, and that's fine. I want to now take a few seconds to talk about how some things changed, kind of with these new business models. They had to come up with some new ways to do a variety of things. They could create affiliate programs. In other words, you would then create a commission from the merchant to a website. So you've got these pay-per-clicks, right? So an advertiser places an ad on a website. Every time there was a click-through, back to the advertiser, they paid the website. They came up with direct ads, banner ads, skyscraper ads, pop-up ads, interrupting ads. They drive us all crazy on the internet, right? All those had to be invented and developed and tested to become part of the business model. They did the direct online sales. We talked about Dell, how they disintermediated everything. Think about Amazon, which is growing to devour the whole world and all of retail, and they absolutely just cut out all the middlemen. They disintermediated. So that was a way to make money online. Some did subscription services, and you may have some subscription services yourself, and you probably can think of some subscription services that you might have that you pay for, Spotify or Sirius or a variety of things like that. Newspapers have been trying to use subscription services. They've always used subscription services for print versions. They were trying to use subscription services for web versions. It's been tough. And then a new model came out, which is really a good one, a freemium model. It's used a lot, in which you offer on the web basic web service for free, but then you say, we have our premium model that offers far more functionality. LinkedIn does this. Many of you are members of LinkedIn. I'm a member. I use the basic free web service. They're always telling me that I could get a much better job if I would just sign up for their premium web service. And I, of course, tell them I'm not interested in having a much better job. So thank you very much, but I'll just skip paying up. But many people do pay up for those premium services. So there's ways you can build the business model. Let's talk about ways you can fail. Because you should always do that, right? Everybody comes up with an idea and they think it's the greatest idea in the world. And you get so passionate and so excited about that. And we know that that passion and excitement is really, really important. But we also know that sometimes you can get carried away by your excitement. Sometimes you could completely misread the customer. You believe the customer is just dying for your product, and they're not. Let me give you two of the most expensive misread of the customer ever in history. And you probably can think of many more. And if you think of any of them, want to put them on the chat bar, just send them through, and I'll read them to the crowd. They can take a look at it themselves, of course, but I always love to see some examples. My favorite, Iridium by Motorola. Motorola decided that everybody in the world would want to have a satellite phone so that you could just call from your phone up to the satellite, down to your friend, and you could talk anywhere. And so they launched 66 low Earth orbit satellites to, send your call around the world. I actually had a satellite phone. They were not all that useful. First of all, it was a big clunky thing. Secondly, there was quite a delay from sending it to the satellite and back, even with the speed of light. That's a long way to go, and a bit of a delay. And of course, they were wrong. They misread the customer. People were not dying to have satellite phones. And cell phones came out, and people were dying to have cell phones, and cell phones have, worked well enough for people that they don't need satellite phones. Another great misread of the customer by Apple. They got everything right, right? Not always. Uh, the Apple Newton was the first tablet computer. It was a clunky thing. Many of my friends, the early adopters in the community, ran out and bought this thing and would run around with it. And but they were the only ones, and customers were not ready. They misread the customer. It failed miserably, and but yet later, when technology advanced, a window of opportunity opened, and they brought out the iPad, and it worked. Okay, the window of opportunity says that if you're too early, the customer's not ready, and if you're too late, the customer's already bought somebody else's solution to their pain. Okay, another fatal flaw in a business model is a very easy one: utterly unsound economics. Every time I tell this to students, I think, well, this is so obvious. Why should I say it? I feel embarrassed saying things like, you don't want to have utterly unsound economics. The joke is, well, we lose money on every item, but we make it up in volume by selling a lot of items. It's so foolish, but I see business plan after business plan with utterly unsound economics, and people haven't noticed that that's a fatal flaw. All right, I'm gonna, pop forward a little bit. We've already talked about the core strategy. We want to see what strategic resources are. We've talked about a partnership network in the case of Uber. We talked about the customer interface in a variety of cases. And so we want to expand a little bit on each of those things this evening before we quit. The core strategy includes mission statement, product market scope, and how you differentiate yourself. How do you differentiate yourself? You could be cost leadership, or it could be a unique product or capability. Apple usually differentiates itself on a unique product or capability. Walmart usually differentiates itself on cost leadership strategy. They're both great companies, but a totally different strategy. We've talked about disruptive innovation. Why is that important? Because if you don't realize that somebody's out there that might take your business away, you can have a business concept blind spot, where Xerox, for example, missed the new world coming in 1,000 ways. But one of the ones was that they were a copier company. Xerox was, a synonym for copying. It's make me a Xerox, make me a copy. That's what they did, and they were the greatest company in the world at that. But then the world came in, with multifunction printers, copiers, fax machines, printing digital documents, and they could have been the leader, but they had a business concept blind spot. HP dominates the market. Kodak or Polaroid, right? Both of them had some investments in digital photography, but they were a chemistry company, and they didn't realize that chemistry was old, electronics was new, and they were in deep trouble. You've heard me again and again, Wang, Digital, Data General, all thought that computing was for professionals and operators and would not be personal, and they were wrong. Okay. Product market scope. You have to get a place to start, and Amazon started selling books. Now they sell everything. HP, their market scope originally was they were focused on the consumer market. Dell moved into a primary focus on the business government market. You notice that UMass Lowell has a lot of Dell computers, and depending on where you work, you may see some of that. I've talked about the leadership strategy. On this slide, I just want to say one thing that I always find entertaining. Target tries to do both. I said that Walmart is a cost leadership strategy. So is Target, but Target tries to upscale itself and say that we're the upscale alternative to Walmart. We are Target. And, it's it was hilarious when I first heard it. It remains hilarious, but they're still doing it, even though they're both really cost leadership strategies. Okay, we need to know what the company's core competencies are, how they leverage their resources, what strategic assets they have. I'm going to be pulling this all together in just a moment into the business model campus. We're going to need to know the partnership network. We did that for Uber. We talked about the partnership. We talked about Dell's partnership with their suppliers. The supply chain is very, very important. Apple is incredibly good on blocking up the supply chain. When they were bringing out a new product, they absolutely locked up all the equipment that could make a competitor to that product at one point, keeping everybody else out of the market. They managed their supply chain. You can do insourcing, moving a partner inside your business. You can do outsourcing, assigning a part of your business outside. These are all ideas for partnership. Which ones are important for you? You have to figure out for your own venture. You could do joint ventures with somebody. You can do a network, a hub and spoke coordinated group. There are consortia where there's maybe 4 or 5 organizations, peer networks, or similar groups, and you decide to work together. You could do a strategic alliance. In the early days, Starbucks and Barnes & Noble had a strategic alliance where Starbucks provided little cafes inside Barnes & Noble. And Barnes & Noble was a big place for people to go and read and browse and everything. That was a different era. Many of you may be too young to remember the days when they had bookstores like that because Amazon.com was kind of blowing them away. Okay, let me go forward. The customer interface is absolutely key. How do you interact with your customers? We talked about why Dell's business model was superior to the others because they interacted directly with their customers. They knew their target market. They knew how to get to the customer. And we're going to do this in a later chapter, so I won't say much on it now. In marketing, they talk about product, price, place, and promotion, the 4 Ps, and that is all part of figuring out the customer interface. So this brings us now to making this formal. We're now going to propose a business model canvas that has these sections that we've talked about each section already. We're assembling this business model canvas. A value proposition. What value do you bring to customers? If you're Uber, you get them around, right? You let them share rides. What customer segments are you going after? How do you get to that customer? If you're Dell, you get to them through the internet. If you're HP in those days, you got to them through the retail stores. Obviously, HP has had to compete with Dell, and they're much more similar today. How do you acquire and retain your customers? What you got to do? For Uber, what you have to do is match up riders and rides and have a computer app that will do that and price it, and it's basically that's their function. But for a taxi company, the key activities would be that you have to buy cars, you have to license your drivers, you have to buy taxi medallions, you have to have a maintenance shed for those cars, you have to have a place to keep the cars, a dispatcher. Think of the difference in activities. Resources, the partnerships we talked about. Most important is the revenue stream. How do you generate the money to do what it is that you want to do? And by the way, what's the cost structure that's out there to allow you to do that? So here's what Andrew Osterwalder came up with. This single canvas, one sheet of paper that looks like this. And basically he said, look at this thing and fill in the blanks. It's the things that we had before. Let's look at one that's filled out as an example. Google, okay? All right, and this, again, is at a particular time. It's changing all the time. I'm going to let you go through it and have a look at that because I have a business model that I think will be a little easier for me to show you coming up in a slide or two. But you can see, let's just pick one thing in the Google business model, the revenue streams. Where do they get their revenue? Ad revenues down there from the Google websites. Enterprise product sales, and they're, by the way, moving into the Amazon.com area and doing a variety of other kinds of services today. Cost structures you can see. Oh, yes. One great example of a failure to do customer discovery and understand your market part of that thing is Segway. And that was an assignment for your reading today. It came out with so much hype. You know, it had a code name. I was watching on TV, and they'd be on the morning news, and Ginger, it's going to be, is it an anti-gravity machine? Is it a personal helicopter? It will revolutionize the city. The most famous venture capitalist in the United States, John Doris, said, it's as important as the internet. By the way, they're saying that about Bitcoin today. Be very, very suspicious. Okay? Steve Jobs claims cities will be built around it. You got to be a little bit careful with these kind of claims. But they were not careful because they didn't bother to do customer discovery. They were so sure of themselves that they set up a factory to produce 40,000 per month. Actually, they never got more than 300 a month, out to sell. So it shows why not understanding the business model can be the end of your business. Now, let me talk a little bit about a UMass Lowell graduate's business. This is Manisha Nazari Goldberg. You met her in the first chapter as one of the many entrepreneurs. Let's take a look at the, how the business model canvas helped her in her founding. First of all, she did a spin-off with Bob Langer from the Langer Lab at MIT. They won the MIT $100,000 business plan competition with an idea of delivering insulin to diabetic patients by giving them chewing gum, and it worked. It's a nanodrug. But once they got going, it got very, very tough to figure out how to do this. So let's take a look at the business model canvas to see if we can see how this went. They identified some key partners. You see those key partners out there: NSF, NIH, Mass Life Sciences, universities, academic centers, venture capital, and philanthropy. They identified key activities: diabetes research, developing transmucosal through the mucous membranes of the mouth, raising funds, writing grants. Those were the activities they had to engage in that we talked about. Resources, scientists. Value proposition, improve patient quality of life, improve compliance relative to injections. Nobody likes to inject, and that's a real problem with especially young patients in diabetes, to get them to regularly take their insulin, go through everything that they have to do. It minimized side effects. You could actually give less. You could reduce hospital stays. You could reduce the overall cost of healthcare. That value proposition is awesome. There's no doubt about it. You can see why they won the MIT 100K. Revenue streams, I'll look down there: commercial, licensing, sale of the company, royalties. You see the channels, customer segments, where they were looking mostly at diabetes patients. But you see down there at the bottom, they thought about, mucositis, which is patients that have been through radiation therapy have a disruption of their mucous membranes. Oral cancer, cancer in the mouth, they said, hey, we might look at that too, but mainly they were focused on diabetes. So what do you do next? We're going to study the Lean Launchpad in a future chapter. And when we do, they're going to say, get out of the office, go and talk to people, learn from your mistakes, pivot. So they went out. They interviewed 20 physicians, 40 scientists, 12 attorneys, 6 multinational pharmaceutical companies. They wrote many grants. I served as advisor, full disclosure. I was on some of these grants. And they got these grants. They met with the governments of 7 other countries who invited them to come and offered them money to go and do that. But they learned something. They learned something that they didn't really like. They learned that it was going to be very, very difficult for them. Whoop, didn't go forward. Okay, to be able to enter the diabetes market. It was too difficult a market for them to get into. When they learned that, when you learn something new from your customer discovery process, we say they pivot. And they pivoted. Now, in the old way of thinking about entrepreneurship, people would say, this is a failure. You were going to treat diabetes, and now you've discovered you can't. You have failed. In the new way of thinking about it on the Lean Launchpad, you didn't fail. You learned something new about the market. And an analogy that I like is that it's kind of funny when people say a pivot is a failure. So you're walking down a hallway, right? You're looking for the exit door. You open the door. You look in, uh-oh, that's a closet. Okay, sorry. What do? You close that door and you open the next door, right? That's a pivot. Okay, so it's just learning. And it's an element of the Lean Launchpad. So they had to pivot. This business model canvas shows the new business model canvas. There's a lot of it that's the same. A lot of it is the same. Okay? But now they took that thing that they thought they might look at one day, oral cancer, and they said, that's going to be our new target. We can deliver this, our nanotechnology delivered drug. And if you look at this and you see, first of all, let's start with the things that are all in black. The revenue stream didn't change. The cost structure didn't change. You still have salaries, material supplies, fundraising. The channels didn't change. The customer relationship didn't change. The key resources didn't change. Still wanted scientists, an NSF, NIH, IP attorneys. It got a little longer list. Some of the key partners didn't change, but they added some new partners. Hospitals, the global hospitals, the commercial research organizations for manufacturing. And they added some new kinds of activities. Instead of around diabetes, it was around preclinical trials in oral cancer. And the value proposition changed because now you're going after oral cancer instead of going after diabetes. Quite a pivot. That was quite a pivot. So you can begin to see why the Lean Launchpad is different than the traditional business planning, the causal planning that we've talked about. Because causal planners would say they failed. Lean Launchpad would say they succeeded tremendously because they discovered their customers, they found their target market, and you can see why Steve Blank says no business plan survives first contact with a customer. But you can also see, by looking at those 2 sheets of paper, those 2 business model canvases, you can see how they changed their business model. And you can have a sense of whether or not they are going to be successful or not successful. Okay, so I have pretty much covered the business model material. I would have loved to have had more questions, and we still have some time. so that if there's any questions out there, I'd be most happy to answer the questions either about this material, about any of the other reading material for today, or about the way the course is organized and things that you're going to have to do for the course. You could put it either on the chat or, but I would say be sure you read the Segway case study, because it's really a wonderful case study. Dean Kamen just lives up the road here from Lowell in New Hampshire. He's brilliant. He's a wonderful guy. He's an enormously successful entrepreneur, and he totally failed. And he totally failed partly because what the Greeks call hubris, meaning that sometimes when you're so successful, you get to thinking you don't have to follow all the rules. You don't have to go through the customer discovery process. You don't have to pivot because you got it all right up here. And unfortunately, when they brought out the Segway, they thought they were going to sell it to everybody. But in fact, nobody was all that interested in buying the Segway. Worse than that, governments began to say, we don't want these things running around on our sidewalks, running over people's toes, bumping into people. And we certainly don't want them on the road, getting in the way of cars. So cities began to outlaw them, to the point that eventually he sold off the company. Eventually it failed. The whole story's there. It's been bought. Okay. How can we be sure if our target market is the right one, which is a great thing? In some sense, you never can. But I think that the slide that I had up a minute ago with from Manesia, and I'm going to go back to that slide now. Here's how you find out whether your target market is the right one or not, through a customer discovery process. You get out of the office and you talk to the customers. You talk to physicians. You talk to scientists. You even talk to attorneys. They may not be customers, but they're going to advise you on some of the legal issues around that. You talk to the multinational pharmaceutical companies. You may say, well, they're not going to be customers. Oh, yeah, they are. They may buy your company. That's the ultimate customer, right? They buy your company. And they obviously work with the NCI, the National Institute of Health. And so when you go in to determine whether or not you've identified the right market, you're listening, not asking. This is hard for a lot of scientists. I'm a scientist, and so I can say, in the immortal words of the Three Stooges, I resemble that remark. When scientists go out, they want to convince people they know what they're doing. But that's not what you're going to do here, right? And Manesia is a brilliant scientist. But she didn't go out to convince them that she was right about diabetes. She went out there to ask them whether or not that, she could bring this product to market, whether they would be customers and what the issues were. And she found out from them what the issues were by listening instead of talking, which is oftentimes hard. Because, many scientists and engineers think that this is like their PhD defense and they have to be brilliant and convince everybody of this thing instead of just asking the good questions and finding out the market. Eventually, she found that they were very anxious for better delivery of cancer drugs for oral cancer, because oral cancer was a huge problem. There were not good alternative treatments for this thing. Many of the treatments had horrible side effects. They were able to very much reduce the side effects, reduce the dosage, and that's how they discovered that that was a better target, by talking to others. So that's the best way, but you can never be sure how that's going to work out. I'd be happy to answer any other questions if they come by. Thank you. Yes, I appreciate everyone being here tonight. I hope this has been somewhat helpful to you. Yeah. Yes, Nilu? So I say that Nilu says, why, before we go, thank you to those who are saying thank you and that it was helpful. Nilu said, well, how did they know that they were wrong? Well, because by talking to all of these individuals, they discovered that the doctor said, we have an array of treatments for diabetes which we think are fine. Your treatment is not that much better that we can't see you spending $1 billion to get this to the market with a treatment that is better, but not that much better. And not only that, but you've got all these other companies bringing new things to the market that are better and not that much better. You've got too much competition. You have, a product that is not 100 times better. Maybe it's, 10% better, and that probably isn't going to be good enough. So that's basically how you learn that. And as I said, this is not a perfect process. There can be several pivots. You may pivot. This hasn't happened with Manisha, but let's say that she'd gone out there and started working on oral cancer and then discovered that there was a problem with that one and there was a better place to go. You can have multiple pivots. You can pivot more than once. Obviously, you don't want to be thrashing about. You want to be doing this based upon data that are coming back that you've tested, but you don't want to just be jumping around from thing to thing. You want to base it upon the best data available to you, and clearly she worked very, very hard at doing that. So again, to all, thanks to those that put the nice messages on. I hope it has been helpful. Remember, take the test each week, get your 100%. You're very welcome all. Thank you, and good night to all, and perhaps we'll see you next week. I'll certainly see you during the coming week online. Let us hope that the weather in Massachusetts begins to lighten up. Some of you that are both in on-campus classes and online classes know that the online classes just keep going, but the on-campus classes were closed today. So we didn't get a snow day, but they did. But then again, we'll finish on time and cover all the material. All right. Thank you all very much, and good night.